Hi all, I'm Gabriela Houston. Welcome to my show where we talk about storytelling in all its forms. On the show, I talk to artists, journalists, researchers, other writers, of course, and more about how they use storytelling in their jobs and life. This week's guest is the American author, Genevieve Gornichec. She earned her degree in history from the Ohio State University, getting as close to majoring in Vikings as she possibly could. And her study of the Norse myths and Icelandic sagas became her writing inspiration. Her debut novel, The Witch's Heart, was released in 2021 and has been translated into a dozen languages. Her sophomore novel, The Weaver and the Witch Queen, is out on July 25th, 2023. She lives in Cleveland, Ohio. Thank you so much for coming, Genevieve. I'm so
Thank you for
excited to
having
have you
me.
on the show. I absolutely loved your books,
Thank you
and
so
each
much.
one just keeps getting better. So
Thank you.
I mean, I started up there, and I just love The Weaver and the Witch Queen so much.
Thank you.
So, can you tell us very briefly what those two books are about?
So, my debut novel, The Witch's Heart, is a reimagining of the Norse myths, centering a random side character, Angrboda, who is a Jotun and is the mother of three very peculiar apocalyptic children, with everyone's favorite trickster god, Loki. And so it's just kind of while the myths are happening on the main stage,
Mm-hmm.
here's kind of what could be going on backstage,
I
way
mean, all
over
children
here.
feel slightly apocalyptic,
Yes, yeah.
at their
That's what I've
worst.
heard.
But but hers are another level.
Yeah. Yes. And then my second novel, The Weaver and the Witch Queen, is a reimagining of the origin story of Gunhild, Mother of Kings, future Mother of Kings. She's not Mother of Kings in this story yet, because it is kind of her reimagined backstory. And she is a 10th century queen of Norway. And one of the things that I noticed when I was researching, what my next book is going to be, was that Gunhild, who's this really awesome character in the historical sources, like very like a remarkable kind of character um for her time. Uh, she doesn't have any friends, so I was like, what if I just gave her two best friends? And that's how The Weaver and the Witch Queen came to be.
Yes, I love the. I mean, we'll talk about it a little bit later as well. But in The Witch's Heart, there is this very close relationship that the main character develops with another woman. But
Yes.
I love how in The Weaver and the Witch Queen, it's just like the starting point, this unbreakable bond between the three women.
Yeah.
So
Thanks.
when it comes to because I had never heard of Gunhild's sort of story before I started reading a book, and whereas obviously the mother of Fenrir and is kind of is people might have heard of it if they've read Norse myths,
Mhm.
but it's I love how you sort of fill in the gaps in the Eddas, and how did you kind of approach that, and like which gap to fill, like what drew you to those stories?
Well, one of the things is that when it came to the figure of Angrboda, she had a lot of things in common with other like creepy women in the mythology, associations with uh snakes and wolves being the big one. And I kind of like traced a line to like all of these other female figures in the mythology who had similar associations. And okay, so if we can associate Angrboda, wolf and snake, with uh this giantess named Hintla, who rides a wolf in this one poem where she's arguing with Freya. It's great. 10 out of 10, Song of Hintla, totally recommend it. Hintla also has prophetic powers. So I'm like, oh, what if this is the same person? I just took all these women and I made them the same person, and that person is Angrboda. So like it definitely is just like theories. Like I wasn't setting out to like rewrite the entire mythology. I was more like, what if this would be a cool scenario? Like if you know, Angerbo that isn't just some like random giantess that Loki has these kids with, right? Like, what if she is more than that? And that the whole story kind of went from there. And once I had given her all of these like phenomenal cosmic powers, I had to be like, okay, so what kind of person would she be to not use them to stop Ragnarok from happening and save her children? Which, spoiler alert, she doesn't. Ragnarok was always going to happen. It's kind of Ragnarok being the apocalypse in Norse mythology, basically, for anybody who doesn't know, any listeners who are unfamiliar, with the gigantic spoiler I just dropped on you, but everyone everyone dies at the end,
Yes, I mean,
mostly.
of the end of the world,
Yeah,
you would expect so.
right.
Um, I felt like, I remember because we spoke about before how the Eddas, like, were written down by Christian monks,
Right.
and there are certain stories, but they just did not deem as important, and
100%.
and that's and that kind of leads me into the general like gaps in our knowledge, right?
Yes.
Of what, because we know the gods, right?
Yes.
And we know we might know some holidays that are kind of important in the kind of Viking calendar.
Mhm.
But when it comes to like what research did you do when it comes to the lore, about like how people sort of worship the gods, how people sort of addressed their spirituality?
There is a huge gap there, like you said, because even like with the Eddas and the sagas, the medieval Icelandic sagas, which date back to around the same time the Eddas were written down, which is hundreds of years after the Viking Age ended. Um, we're not given like a paganism 101. Like you said, we're not given an instruction manual. We're only given these like little context clues about how these people might have um done their holidays or sacrifices, or how they honored the gods, like how they put their spiritual practices into practice, I guess. And it gets even more complicated because I mean, they didn't have the internet either, right? They didn't even send each other letters. So like the way that somebody honors Thor over here might be totally different than over there. So we're talking like mainland Scandinavia, but also like Iceland, England, all of the diaspora like places might have had different rituals and different ways of doing things. So there wasn't one, kind of dogma. So I guess like when it came to the Weaver and the Witch Queen, especially, I had to try to fill in those gaps like with what I knew. And like even at times I think that it comes off as a little bit too secular just because I didn't want to take these huge chances, these huge leaps when it came to like pagan
Mm.
ritual and such. Like so I did research on like the heathen festival year. I did research on like reconstructing heathen rituals, but like there's a lot out there, but there's also not a lot out there. Like, I would,
Yes.
I, you definitely have to be wary of anybody who's trying to sell you like on definitive facts when the fact is that we just don't know. So, like,
That
especially
is
that's where like Facebook is kind of notorious for that. People in the comment section of every post about Norse paganism going, "Oh, well, this is what they did." Was it what they did? Or did you
Facebook,
just make that up?
TikTok. Yes. I mean,
Yes.
it's the same, because obviously I did a little bit of what you did. I mean, I didn't go as far as getting a history degree in it, but but when I was researching Slavic folklore for my books, I realized, there's those huge gaps. And also, unlike the Norse mythologies, the myths were never written down by the monks, because the approach to sort of making those lands Christian it was a later process, and it was a far more brutal process. So the rulers of what the lands are like now Poland, it had to be done quickly, because there were Christian countries on either side that would be
Yes.
very happy to incorporate
Yeah.
the very new kingdom. And so you had to do things pretty quickly. And so erasure was the method chosen.
Wow.
But of course, you can't erase stories, not
Right.
entirely. And now we
Right.
have this, similarly to, and that leads me into the kind of your reenactment sort of
Yes.
career. In that, there's like so many different sciences mixed together. There's like the linguistics with comparative linguistics. There's the archaeological like finds. There's the anthropological studies where you compare how certain things develop. So you are, of course, very knowledgeable, and like you do a lot of reenactment,
Mm.
or did.
I do, yeah.
Yes, I mean,
I
when time
I
permits.
I have approximate knowledge of many of the things you just mentioned,
So,
but just approximate.
so can you tell me a little bit about that? Because, you know, reenactment is a form of storytelling in itself. You take those different fragments and you try to create a coherent narrative of how people behaved. You know, when you have no continuity, you have like those broken traditions. So how did you sort of, how do you approach it? How does the community of reenactors like approach that?
At least I can only speak for the reenactment community, the Viking Age reenactment community in the States, and I know that it's very different in different places abroad. I've met reenactors from abroad, and we have different experiences. Um, but even here, it greatly varies the reasons that people come into this hobby. Uh, I came at it from a historical point of view. I got into it literally because I bought a Viking, quote unquote, off the internet and went to a Renaissance fair and got picked up by the group that was hanging out there. And I literally got that outfit just on a whim because I had just declined acceptance to graduate school in Iceland for Viking medieval Norse studies. Yeah, undergraduate student loan debt in the States is no joke. Let me just say, yeah, the face you're making, yes,
They're
exactly.
criminal, is what they are.
Yes,
I mean,
absolutely.
from a European's perspective,
Yes.
they're just criminal.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. So, but like literally, I mean, that was my jumping off point, right? I came into this hobby knowing a ton of stuff about the myths and the sagas, but I knew nothing about everyday life, material culture, stuff like that. So, once I started doing living history, I was able to go back and kind of add more details to The Witch's Heart, which was the book that I had already written at the time that I started doing reenactment 10 years ago this year, actually. So from my point of view, it's like, okay, I'm more fixated on the everyday life stuff, the craft stuff, textiles especially because that was largely the realm of women and it gave them considerable power within their society. Because everybody needs clothes, and if you are a maritime society and you're going everywhere on your ships need sails. So women were the ones making those. Um, but then again, there are also portions of the reenactment community who are way more interested in like the combat side, right? Maybe they saw History Channel's Vikings and they're looking to be like the next Ragnar, and that's fine. Like I know a ton of people like that, and they
I
are
mean,
great
I don't
people.
think anybody needs the next Ragnar in this world. Like
Right.
that is not what that is not.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
as lovely as it might be to watch it on the
Yes.
screen.
Yeah. Um, but yeah, then like a lot of the times then people will come to the hobby of living history or reenactment, depending on there some people differentiate between the two terms. I kind of use them interchangeably because living history is just like too long. I guess reenactment is pretty long too. Anyway, sorry. But yeah, so I approached uh living history like from like how can I incorporate this into my book kind of like deal because it's for me like I need to do things hands-on to be able to describe them correctly or with any sort of authenticity within a story that I'm writing. So cooking in a cauldron over the fire, done it. Like all these like weaving tasks that my characters do, I've done them. Um and ironically, a lot of the weaving got cut from The Weaver and the Witch Queen because it was too long, and I was asked to cut it down.
It's
So
so
this,
painful because, like, as an author, you know how much research goes into those
yeah,
things, and it can be hours. Like, I mean,
Yes.
I remember I spent hours of research on Stone Age wool cleaning
Yes.
techniques
Yes.
just to research it. And it was like 2
Yes.
sentences in the
Yep.
book.
Yep.
So to cut it, I mean,
Yes.
I am
Yes.
sympathize, honestly.
Yep. Did I ever tell you about the door hinges in The Witch's Heart?
No.
I went down like an hours long rabbit hole looking up stuff about Viking Age door hinges, and it ended up being like 3 paragraphs in The Witch's Heart that I wrote, like 3 entire paragraphs about door hinges. And when I
Hmm.
was rereading one of like the final, I think it was either copy edits. Yeah, I think it was copy edits. And I was reading the whole thing aloud again, and I got to the part with the door hinges, and I was like, this is boring. And then I cut it down to like 1 sentence. But like that was hours of my
Ah,
life that I just cut because in the end it didn't matter.
no, but it wouldn't be boring to me, I have to say. I'm
Oh,
the kind of
please.
reader who really wants
Yeah.
those details. Because to
I
me,
love
they're so
details.
juicy and they kind of,
Yeah.
it's, I think it's so important to kind of, I mean, I don't know if it's like, people are people's attention span can get shorter,
Hmm. Yeah.
thanks TikTok,
Right.
or what it is. But like, people like, not everybody, obviously, um, but there is like a loss of patience. Like, when you come,
Yes.
when it comes to books, when it comes to descriptions, when you look
100%.
at the,
Yes.
Dickens's sort of Bleak House, and you have literally 50 pages of a description of the fog. And I mean, I used to be a more patient reader, but I like it was a bit much even for me. And yet, like, people
Yeah.
read it with this kind of like they were enthralled by it, and
Yeah.
but it's and I think if we lose so much if we're not willing to give the time to give this atmosphere.
Yeah. I agree because it's those little details that make a story like tangible almost. Like,
Yes.
and I love them. They're delicious. But I mean, I swear the door hinges part was it was so
Okay, I mean,
boring.
I'll take your word for it. I'll take your
I
word for it. But it's like,
like
you read the book. I want to be able to imagine the smell coming from that cauldron.
yes. Yes. It's great.
I mean, I was thinking about, in the context of a reenactment and the way people tell stories of the past, how they often like superimpose their values and
Hmm.
their own personal biases and point of view onto the past. And
Right.
so, for example, researchers for decades just assuming that the Viking warriors dug up were all men.
BJ 581, my friend.
Yes. Well, until they actually, sent, I think, like a female
Yes.
archaeologist who was like, did you actually look at these bones?
Yeah.
and,
Yep.
and it turned out that roughly 50% were women. So, but that comes from the like biases of the past. And I
Mhm.
sometimes wonder about, do you think it's like what comes from like our attachment to comfort, to like mental comfort, so that like we don't want to step outside of it? Or is it just like limit in understanding?
That is so hard. And that's something that I have thought about a lot, especially with the Weaver and the Witch Queen. Because the Witch's Heart, mythological stuff, it's kind of like suspend your disbelief. She gave birth to a wolf. Like it's fine. It's over here. But like setting something like in the actual, even like a fantasy version of the past, there are some things that people are not willing to suspend their disbelief for. And like knowing that line, like, okay, I want to like portray these characters as authentically as I can, but at the same time, I need to make my readers connect with them, even though like these characters' mindsets would have been completely alien to them. We have to find the common threads of like, okay, like what do we have in common like as humans? Um, so for that, it came down to like the bonds of friendship and love, etc. But it's
Universal.
yeah, and it's just yeah, it's hard to say what like people are gonna go, oh, that's so modern, where like it actually isn't, or oh, that's like too archaic. Like I can't get behind that. Well, yeah, because it was hundreds and hundreds of years ago. So I guess at the end of the day, you can never like anticipate people's reactions correctly, and you just kind of have to go with your gut and do your best and say, okay,
Yes,
what
I don't think you
vibes?
should. I don't think you should necessarily try as an artist, because
Yeah.
you can really get caught up in a kind of, will people criticize this, will people criticize that, and then you don't end up producing your best work.
Uh-huh. Yes.
Uh,
I'm
but
intimately familiar with this. Yes.
but the thing is that it's like, in terms of like, it's really interesting. So what you're saying about trying to walk that line
Mhm.
between ultra authentic, and to begin with, we find it very difficult to figure out what ultra authentic was for that time
Right.
period.
Yes. Yes.
um and on the other hand, accessibility. And I mean, that's something I had a conversation about it when I was talking in an interview about my recent book, Bone Roots, about
Mhm.
how like, when I'm researching how women were sort of treated in the Polish countryside until the end of World War II, really, until like the sort of dawn of communism, until the 50s. Um, it was so dehumanizing. And I've been reading this like nonfiction book about it. But I was thinking about how I I want to give a taste of it,
Mhm.
but I don't want to be too close to it when I write a book, because if I write it authentically for that, and I mean, of course, I also don't know how women were treated in the like ancient Slavic culture, which was very
Mhm.
different from
Right.
the Christian Slavic culture.
Yes.
Um, there's suggestion that women were treated a whole lot better then, but we can't know for sure, right?
Right.
Um, but if I too close to this research, then the book will become about that.
Yes. Yes.
So, but like, but you like those tangible things. Like, how did you kind of approach that? And like, in the in your new book, you have this tension about marriage, and about
Mhm.
like the kind of the way that relationships are formulated, and the polygamy, and the kind of the like the old men having like multiple wives. And
Right.
why did you decide to go for that, and to choose that in your book, and to sort of give it such a prominent place?
Uh, in Heimskringla, which is one of the my biggest sources that I used, it talks about all of the wives that Harald Fairhair, the first king of Norway, had, because he basically just went around the country marrying the daughters of important men to unify the country. And you don't see polygamy a lot in the sources. I mean, like clearly it wasn't frowned upon, like if you had the resources to like support all of these humans that you were creating with all of your wives. I know, right? But
You'd hope so, but
yeah, but I had to keep that in there just because like that
mm,
is such a huge source of the tension between like Eric and his brothers, because they didn't have like back then they didn't have like oh, the firstborn son is going to be king, or like the son of this wife is going to be king. No, it was whoever dad picks, I guess, because Karl, he was the first king of the whole country. So it was kind of like he was kind of making his own way. He unified Norway in
mm,
the 870s. So The Weaver and the Witch Queen takes place in the 920s. So we're talking 50 years after he unifies the country. He's gone around, he's had all these kids. All these sons are wanting to be the next king of Norway, and he chooses Erik Bloodaxe. And
was the axe blooded on on Eric's brothers, or
say what?
no? It's like the blood axe is like, was
Yeah,
the axe
we think that that's part of where his nickname came from, but we don't know for
yes.
sure.
Mm.
It's funny because like a lot of these nicknames are that you see in the stories are probably not nicknames that the characters would have been called in their lifetime. And if I am allowed to continue with Gunhild's story, she's gonna have a lot of anxiety over being told her nickname in the first book. Um,
I see.
So like
Yeah.
because Mother of Kings implies she's like, okay, well, will I get to live to see my sons be kings? Because if I do, that means their father's gonna die before I do, and I'm not okay with that. So like that's good, yeah, the nickname was kind of dropped on her by a
Yeah.
certain prophetic deity in the first book.
I mean, I feel like that's
And
how nicknames just work, isn't it?
right. Either that or some guy is writing the saga down and he's like, there's too many guys named Bjorn. Like we have to have nicknames for all these different Bjorns. Okay, Bjorn the Stout, Bjorn the Tall, Bjorn the Bearded, like so I don't know, it's hard to say like where the nicknames came from specifically.
I mean, yeah, we had like some Polish kings was and their nicknames usually had to do with some like physical malformation or of
Yes.
some
There
kind. So
there are a
like,
lot of mean nicknames in the
yes,
Icelandic
the crooked
sagas.
mouth, or
Yes.
there was a king we called Woketek, which is like the elbow, because they were like he was as tall as like from your hand to your elbow. And I'm like that is so mean.
Oh, yikes.
Like I wonder if people called him that in his day as
Yeah.
well. It's
Yeah.
just yeah. But yeah, I was when it comes to the sort of traditions, like going again into the traditions, I've noticed that I was really happy to see, because you obviously write about Norway,
Mhm.
and there is a mention of the Sami people, the indigenous people of Norway, and actually it's really interesting how even within Europe there's a lot of people that they don't realize that there is an indigenous population in
Yeah.
Norway that has been historically and still is in many ways sort of politically suppressed,
Yes, very
and
much.
that the Sami people are not Vikings, and but they obviously must have interacted and that they have
Uh-huh.
kind of lived alongside. So, and you have incorporated little elements, because I think their spirituality is sort of more shamanistic in nature, if I
Yes.
understand correctly. So you have, uh, I felt like there was a strong influence in the book. Can you sort of talk about it a little bit?
Yeah. So w- I really wanted to make the Sami presence in the book more prominent, but at the time that I was writing it, I did not have access to a lot of English language sources on the Sami in the Viking Age. So really all I could do was like go with modern sources, which like I know are much different than how it would have been in the Viking Age. And I did have a Sami authenticity reader kind of take a look at those parts just to make sure that like there wasn't anything that was totally like left field. With a disclaimer that this they were like, I'm only one person, I can only speak for me, but like
Us, yeah.
um and unfortunately there were a lot of things even they didn't know about like the Sami and the Viking Age just because so much of Sami culture from back then was lost um in the 1600s and onward when the Christian missionaries came into Sapmi and converted the Sami um and basically like did horrible things to them over the next 100 years, very similar to what the United States and Canadian government have done to our indigenous populations over here in North America. So the Sami are still fighting for their rights. Um, and so I didn't want to completely ignore the presence of the Sami people in the Viking Age, but there was only so much detail I could go into because I didn't want to get things wrong. But literally the week that I turned in copy edits on The Weaver and the Witch Queen, um, I think like two English language books about the Sami and the Viking Age dropped like that week. And I was like, are you kidding me?
Great timing.
So,
Always great
yeah,
timing, isn't it? It's
right.
just
Yes. And I was like, okay, so I have them. So hopefully, I'll be able to do a little bit better next time. But yeah, it was important to me not to just be like, we're just gonna not mention this at all because they were there and they had some level of cultural exchange, and it would be irresponsible to ignore that. So,
yeah, I think it's really I really enjoyed that you didn't sort of just omit their existence.
mhm.
And that I felt like the Gunhild, the sort of the main protagonist sort of abilities felt very close to kind of this sort of more like shamanistic traditions with the
Yes.
chanting and
Yeah.
and I felt like that link for me kind of helped to cement a little bit the theme of a kind of an outsider woman. And that is a theme that appears in both your books, of course,
Yes.
in sort of slightly different ways. But it's like, you seem to be drawn to this sort of theme of the outcasts. And I've noticed that there's also the theme of being alone in a time of being left alone in a time of struggle. So what draws you to this particular theme?
I don't, I feel like it was mostly unconsciously that I was drawn to it. I don't know. I just, I guess at the end of the day, like for so much of my life, I've tried to be self-sufficient, tried to be like, oh, I don't need anybody. I'll be fine on my own. But at the end of the day, like it is your family, found family and blood family, or blood family, and your community. Really, that's you know, you get by with a little help from your friends, as they
Mm.
say. Like, I feel like what's something that Angerboda and Gunhild have in common is that they both try to be an island. And at the end of the day, like they do need help from their loved ones. Um, but when the time comes to like actually do what they have to do themselves, they will do it. But to get to the point where they can actually do it, they need help. And
Yes.
that's nothing to be ashamed of.
I think it's a very beautiful theme, and I think that is something that there's a certain universality to it, in that many people will find that they are strong enough to face the
Mhm.
challenges
Right.
in their lives, but to even have that continuous faith in yourself,
Hmm.
you do need some outside reinforcement. Often
Right.
it's so hard, and it's so rare for a person to just stand in the face of constant rejection and criticism and to have unwavering faith in their own strength. and
Right.
and I like that, like, your characters in both your books have that quality. They're incredibly capable, they are incredibly strong, but that little extra ingredient that helps them to achieve that are the friendships.
Right.
And I was thinking actually about, like, how woman centric your books are, which I of course love
Yes.
and I want to see
Thanks.
more of. And it's not in the kind of, the kick-ass girl boss sort of way. You have a variety of women who have very different sets of values. They have very different ways of doing things, and it's a very intimate portrayal of all of those women. I liked also of like Ovna's sort of experience of that felt like endometriosis to me. I don't know if that was what you were describing. So
Yeah.
there's, one of the characters, one of the blood sisters of Gunhild, experiences severe pain that sort of matches the symptoms of endometriosis.
Yes.
It's interesting also to me because I did like an interview with an artist, Kerry Walsh, who does very interesting art that is sort of 3D sculptures that are to do with her own journey of endometriosis and medical trauma.
Oh. Oh my goodness.
And it's very powerful, and it's still such a taboo, and she's still
Yeah.
been she is being told, by during Galley, she was told to take some of her art down, because it was just too much,
Yeah.
and you're thinking about, this is something that affects so many women. And I was wondering what drew you to write that in.
So I don't have endometriosis, but I have PCOS. which also can be very painful, and unpredictable. And I never see it portrayed in fiction, let alone historical fiction. So I started thinking like, how would women back then, like like if you have a uterus, how would you have dealt with this? Right? Like I- and for Odney, I mean, like I've seen people be like, why is this important? Why was this even in there? It's so stupid that the periods were included in this book. It's like half the population has them.
Yes, I mean,
Like they're a
and
part
the
of our lives.
matriosis touches 1 in 10 women.
Yeah. So it's like
10%.
and like
But
PCOS, not a lot of research has been done on it. Because if you
yes,
have a uterus, whatever, I guess, right? Like
I mean, and it's fascinating study that is still considered so strangely taboo. I mean,
right.
I remember I was doing research, and I could just not. I try the information I tried to find
Hmm.
was how did women in imperial Russia in kind of the 18th century, early 19th century deal with their periods? No information
Nope.
available, you know,
Nope.
and some, I had some lovely women sort of reach out to me and tell me about how their like grandmothers in uh like a Liverpool sort of factory estate
Mm.
had to cope with it, and it it was interesting for me because I got this information from like different sources and sort of compared them. I didn't end up using any of it when
Oh
we were talking
geez.
on the subject of research,
Yeah.
but it's really fascinating how that information is missing,
Yep.
and it's such a huge part of women's life.
Yeah.
Did you have any other like moments like that where you felt like this should be known, like you were writing the story and you felt
I feel like I had plenty of moments like that, but none of them come to mind. Sorry. Um, yeah, plenty of things where I was like, oh, this would be cool to put in a fantasy novel. This like hasn't been done or that I have seen
mm,
because I haven't read every fantasy novel, so
no.
but I've only read one or two that have mentioned like
Shocking,
periods. So
shocking,
I
yeah.
know, right? Even
Yeah.
even if the main characters in theory would have had a period, we just never hear about it. So it's
Hmm. It's like when you have a whole book and the character doesn't eat once.
yeah, how about that?
Yes, it's quite, and it's not that you need to kind of focus on every aspect of sort of physiological
Right,
sort of life of your
right.
character, but I think to deny that reality is to deny them humanity as well.
Yeah. And that's another, another connection, I guess, between like people of the past and now. It's like, oh yes, people still got their periods. So just like us. Like, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, if it makes people feel a little bit more comfortable, your book does focus on witchcraft. So, we can just
Right.
put the
Right.
endometriosis and those like nasty female bits into the witchcraft basket and it will make people more comfortable, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, speaking of witchcraft, you are clearly very much interested in witches in general. Like, what
Yeah.
draws you to the witches?
Uh I don't know. Just this idea of women having their own power that doesn't have to do with hitting people with swords, which is cool. But it's just another way for women, especially like in history or fantasy, Viking Age stuff, to have some agency and to have some power and control over their own fates, without
Hmm.
having to be like the warrior woman. Because shield maidens are cool. Shield maidens are very cool, but like if they were a thing, and I'm not saying they weren't, it would have been such like a small percentage of women who were in this role, and the rest of them would have been doing everything else to like keep their society going. So, and I think that the contribution of women has been undervalued for centuries and centuries. So like witchcraft, it I know it's kind of making like a comeback, but it just has always kind of spoken to me, this idea of like, okay, you don't have to be um the toughest guy in the room to get what you want. And that is the role of witches in the Icelandic sagas too, and in the myths. So it's
Yes.
pretty cool.
I think it's some of the danger associated with the witches is
Hmm.
precisely what you describe, in that they are carving out a different space for themselves,
Yes.
a space that is not necessarily ruled by the same laws that the other members of our society have to
Yes.
adapt to.
Yes.
And that can breed resentment, I feel like. I find,
Right.
like, for example, the women I've met, I had this conversation today actually with a friend, that women that um, are the most oppressed, or that in the sense that they are the most adjusted to the like most unfair versions of sort of patriarchal societies, are often the like staunchest defenders of it, and they're the ones who are shocked if you do not adhere to the same norms, because they feel like, well, I have accepted that suffering is my lot in life.
Yeah.
Why do you not accept it?
And they almost don't know who they are without it, right? Like, and like in addition to those people, we also have people who, like in The Weaver and the Witch Queen, Queen Gita, like she does her part, and Gunhild's mother as well, like does her part to try to enforce these social norms, because they in their society they are women with power, but their power comes from their proximity to the men. Like, so it is in their interest to uphold the structure of power. Eh? Even
Yes,
if it like puts
absolutely.
them
So
in the box.
they got theirs, and yeah, I mean, it's a common theme in general, isn't it? When like people who were oppressed, they get to rise a little bit above the rest, and then they try to keep the others in check, just in case their little ground that they've gained will be
Yeah,
taken away from them.
exactly.
And that's the sort of precariousness of it. Um, well, you know, you're sort of touched on Gulhild's mother, and obviously motherhood is like such a strong theme in your books, and it's something that everybody can like, or, you know, everybody, most people can relate to, in terms of, you know, we all came from a woman, and you know, even if we don't choose to have children ourselves, or even if we don't have a relationship with a sort of biological mother, uh, like we can kind of understand that. We can kind of understand this tension, this constant sort of push and pull in those relationships. And
Right.
obviously, in The Witch's Heart, you have the kind of mother that will just straight up defend her children no matter what. Like she gave birth to actual monsters, and she can still find uh, beauty in them, and she will defend them to the death,
Yes.
to the death of everything, you know.
Yes.
And but you have you know, because this book is sort of less intimate in many ways, it has like a wider range of characters, you have different types of motherhood represented.
Yes, I
So
do.
why did you choose it to do it this way, especially with, you know, Gunhild's mother, who is quite monstrous to her?
Well, I feel like, in The Witch's Heart, Angerboda isn't perfect, but she like is a great example of the mother who will sacrifice anything for her kids, like you said. But she's not the only type there is. So I didn't want all of my books to just have this. And aren't mothers great? They can do no wrong. They're just the I have a lot of friends who can really identify with Gunhild's mother, unfortunately, like her experience with her mother, the gaslighting, the neglect and abusive words. And I thought that that was also important to represent too. Because I feel like, especially when writing like historical fantasy, people are like, oh, history, everybody was treated badly in history. Everything was brutal, they beat their kids, blah, 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 blah. But it's like, not everyone was like
No.
that. Like we have some examples of burials from the Viking Age of children that were, it was very clear that the children were cherished
I
and
mean,
and
absolutely.
beloved. Like
It
I don't.
feels like such a like even having to say that says how far the society's fallen in terms of understanding historical context. I
Yeah.
feel like because um this idea that because people behaved in ways that we deem unacceptable now, or that
Hmm.
psychologists have discovered are are damaging to children's sort of
Right.
development, but were widely practiced throughout the world, like that doesn't mean that those parents were bad parents. It doesn't mean that they were abused, because this was like a different context, and they might have cherished their children in a way that is almost indescribable.
Hmm.
And I think, but like obviously Gunhild's mother is lacking, not because she wants to marry Gunhild off, right? She is monstrous because of the lack of love.
Yes, 100%. And that is, I didn't really get a chance to go into this in the book, but like Gunhild's mother had love for all of her other children, especially her two sons, Gunhild's brothers. So like the contrast between like how Gunhild is treated, being like a late in life unwanted daughter, like the seventh daughter. Like we've already married off the first six ones, and now we got another one. Ugh. Um, yeah, that's something that like I had to cut out parts where that was like kind of addressed, that like her other siblings were treated better. So it really was like a lack of love from the start almost. Yeah, Solveig is a hard character to sympathize with. And unfortunately, she was inspired by many of my friends' mothers.
Hmm.
Um,
I feel like I was, when I was reading sort of the parts with Solveig in a minute, I was thinking about how lack of sort of contraceptive care and lack of reproductive control had the absolute power to ruin women's lives. And reading about sort of this book I referred to earlier, it's called Chłopki, the female peasants, and how those women would be married off at 15, maybe 16, and then they would not stop having children. They had no control
uh-huh.
over whether or not their husband decided to impregnate them, and they had no control over those children. And when you have 13 children, you simply do not have the capacity, and you have to
Right.
do everything in a farm, and and you
Right.
have to look after the animals, and you have to make the
Right.
clothes, and you have to make the food, and you have to do all the crafts that you can sell, and then you have to go to the market and sell stuff, and
Yes.
you have to attend to all those different things, and you are simply left with no control, like, or and no capacity to emphasize with your children. And there is this
Yes.
um huge cruelty in like forcing motherhood on people who are just done emotionally and physically.
Yes.
And it's and so when you say it's hard to sympathize with Solveig, because we see it from Gunhild's point of view, and because
Right.
lack of love for a child is such a heartbreaking thing.
Right.
But I actually was thinking about how heartbreaking it is to,
To not have a
years after you
choice.
had your last child, to just be
Yeah.
forced again into
Yeah.
this people like to sort of think, because we do not talk about women's health
Right.
as much,
Right.
like we sort of touched on before, but childbirth and pregnancy changes your
Dangerous.
body. It's
Yeah.
dangerous even now. It changes
Yes.
your body forever. It
Yep.
is it is not a lightly to be undertaken lightly.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
I did have some sympathy for Solveig, not in the way she dealt with it, but I definitely felt like,
But the situation. And
yes,
she even I would say also that like it would be one thing if like a character like Audney's mother had had 13 children because they are poor. So like maybe she would have been just as bad as Solveig by the last child, right? But Solveig like also is a woman of means, like so she wouldn't have to do all the work on the farm and like go, to the market and stuff. She had people to do that for her.
of course.
But like I also totally understand where you're coming from, and I didn't think of it that way, honestly. I was just
I
like,
mean, you wrote it that
yeah,
way. You literally
yeah,
wrote it
yeah.
that way.
Right.
But I think it's interesting when you write, because I felt like Solveig was a well-rounded character. I didn't
Hmm.
think she was this one-dimensional kind of
Yeah,
monster. I felt because you gave her that additional pain that she's carrying, and even
right,
though on the balance she did kind of make herself into a monster in her daughter's
right,
life,
right,
it kind of pulled on a thread that I think
right.
could fill another book.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Because I mean, I have already started playing around with sequels, and they're definitely Solveig comes back in spirit through Gunhild's sisters and brothers when she sits down to talk with them now that they're all adults. Because by the time she runs into her brothers in The Weaver and the Witch Queen, it's been 12 years. She hasn't seen them since she was 12 years old. So it's very much like they're strangers, like they're her blood, but they're strangers. And so some of the only things they have to talk about anymore is like, hey, remember when mom and dad were alive? And the brothers are gonna have a very different, and her older sisters, who are also over a decade older than her, are gonna have very different memories of Solveig than Gunhild had.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, I think it's psychologists say that, like, when people wonder why are the siblings so different, it's because they don't grow up in the same family. Like
Yeah,
it doesn't matter how much your parents try to treat you equally. This is not like the second born's family is not the same as the firstborn's family. Their
yeah,
experiences will differ.
100%. Yes.
And of course that, like, that can be taken to extreme, as in the case in this book.
Right.
So on that note, is there anything that you can tell us about your kind of future projects? Is there anything that you'd like to
I
give
wish
us a
I could.
glimpse at, or are you going to be mysterious? Okay.
I'm going to be unintentionally mysterious because it is well, publishing, it's a lot of hurry up and wait. So I am waiting. I'm
Yes,
in the
and
waiting, can't
so
say
are
anything
your loyal
stage.
readers.
Oh,
So
thanks.
I really hope that your publisher hurries up,
Fingers
because I
crossed.
am ready for the next part.
Oh, thank you.
On that note, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really loved our chat today.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me. It was great.
Thank you for watching the video. Every week there's something different, so click like and subscribe if you would like more. It really helps the channel. Thank you, and see you next week.